So the story goes something like this. Alexander Pope's father was this linen merchant, but a very educated man, and had this re- almost an over reliance on mathematics and judged people on the basis of their mathematical ability. So, being a very rich man, he wanted to provide the best education to his son. Alexander Pope was this very weak, physically very feeble child growing up. I mean, he more or less retained that physicality throughout his life. But especially when he was a child, we're talking about this very weak sort of a kid physically. So, with his reliance on education, Pope's father, he provided home tutors to Alexander Pope throughout his life. And while he was doing well in pretty much all the other subjects, mathematics was something that he was really struggling at. So he hired one home tutor, he gave up after 6 months, then he hired another, he gave up after 6 months. So this continued for a while. After a year or two, Alexander Pope's father decided that I'll become his maths tutor. So one day, while he was taking one of his lessons with Alexander Pope, his father gave him a couple of problems, mathematical problems, and said that I'll be back in 10 minutes. I need to do something in the house, and by the time I come back, you should have done and solved these two problems. 10-15 minutes later, Pope's father comes back, and he sees that the mathematical problems that he had given him, that paper was lying somewhere on the floor. And this kid was writing poetry. He was obsessed with writing poetry, a couplet there and now and then. So as he comes back, his father becomes really furious. He always had his walking stick in his hand. He took that stick and he started bashing him. So after a couple of lashes, if I may. And while that child was in all of that trauma that my father is beating me almost mercilessly, he just turns around and says, "Father, Father, mercy take, no more verses shall I make." And that is where Alexander Pope's father stopped. And that was the last time he ever asked him to sort of focus on mathematics or anything else. From that day onwards, he just allowed him to be. And as we know, of course, Alexander Pope became one of the greatest poets literature has ever seen. In a time when wit was sharper than swords and a reputation could be destroyed in a single couplet, Alexander Pope didn't just survive, he thrived. We're talking about the king of wit and irony. Imagine a Twitter thread so elegant and vicious it would be framed and studied for centuries. That was Pope. Hi, Whiskey. Welcome back to Literary Lenses, where we explore the lives and minds of the critics and poets who shaped how we read, how we think, and how we write. Today, we meet the man who made poetry a weapon and criticism an art, Alexander Pope. Born in 1688, Pope faced physical disabilities from a young age. Like I said, we're talking about someone who's very feeble growing up. But his pen gave him a stature beyond measure. Self-educated and fiercely determined. He became one of the most quoted poets in the English language and one of the most feared critics of his time. In an essay on criticism, Pope laid down rules for how to judge literature with fairness, clarity, and respect for classical models. We're talking about the neo-classical age, the Augustan age, where these modern writers had sort of gone back to the classical authors and the rules that they had shared. But don't mistake him for mild-mannered. Pope could eviscerate his opponents with a perfectly polished couplet. Like this one. Yes, I am proud. I must be proud to see men not afraid of God, afraid of me. If you don't know what a heroic couplet is, in very simple terms, we're talking about two lines that are rhyming with each other, and every line has exactly 10 syllables. That isn't easy to do. Writing poems of 300, 400, 700 words even, and every two lines are rhyming with each other, and each line only has 10 syllables each. Beauties in vain their pretty eyes may roll, charms strike the side, but merits win the soul. The power of wit. Pope's work, the Dunciad, it took on mediocrity in literature with relentless precision. His satire was not just mockery, it was moral critique. He believed art should uphold truth, it should uphold order and beauty. And he had no patience for those who use the pen without purpose. Absolutely not. In the age of memes, subtweets, and viral callouts, Pope's approach still matters. He teaches us that criticism without craftsmanship is just noise. And that wit without wisdom is absolutely wasted. In other words, if you're going to throw shade, at least make it rhyme. Alexander Pope proved that style and substance don't have to be enemies. They can march into battle together. And when they do, the world listens. If you enjoyed this dive into Pope's literary genius, hit subscribe and join us next time as we explore another voice that shaped the world of letters. And yes, of course, Whiskey says hi.